Got Instagram. Good evening, Travis. I am
Mike, you're resilient. We're W.A.R. How you doing?
I am doing great. Good to see you again. I had to take a little time off there. I'm on the loss of a family member. Thank you guys for understanding. That we had to take some time to live the lives outside of the internet every now and again.
Absolutely.
And we got some good stuff coming up still. I've got 2 events that are up and coming. One is this weekend. I've got the usual. Let's see if I can throw this up here. The Coffee and Camaraderie. That's going to be at the VFW over in North Attleboro this weekend. I'm doing the usual 10 to 12 Saturday. Family, friends, welcome, all ages. We'll have video games, board games, cards, and of course free coffee and donuts. The best part of it all.
Nice, good stuff.
And then we actually have another event coming up with the DAV in up in Swampscott. And let me see if I have one of those flyers here. I do. And this isn't the finished product, but it is what's going on. So we'll give the the overview of it. And we do have QR codes and everything for folks that want to sign up. And DAV Chapter 64 Family Game Day during April vacation, Monday, Patriots Day, 12 to 4 at the Peabody VFW. DAV Chapter 64, and myself, Hellfish Haven, we're going to have a family game day up there. Board games, card games, recreational activities, raffles, and they like to be able to have a good day with the DAV up there while the kids are having vacation. Give you guys something to do, veterans and family together.
Nice.
And we got one jumping in, letting know that they saw Emily on the show the other day I was on, and she absolutely is precious. Thank you, Carol Sue Scott. Appreciate that. Definitely, good to have the little one. She does. As soon as I told her I was going to be on with Travis tonight, she goes, "Oh, can I come say hi?" So she'll jump on the end with us tonight to say hello and see what's going on. And good evening, Sarah. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. And so everything's going crazy over in the Middle East, Travis. Your Marines have gotten standby orders, it looks like.
Yeah.
And don't know what the next move's going to be, but just hope that everybody stays safe out there. That's all we can hope for, is that that nothing crazy pops off, and there's no mass casualties or anything like that. The tough part about that area and the bases that are over there is they're not really equipped for incoming rounds and things like that. A lot of it's tents and areas that were set up to be there for a short amount of time, and we just kind of stayed along, and so it's definitely been tough to see. Sarah said that she's been checking in with Professor Terrell's war coverage every day, and it is sad to see everything progressing as it has. It definitely seems like something that we could have avoided or could have stayed back of, and it just doesn't seem like we have the support of the nations in that area besides the one that started off with us.
So for me, historically, you could say that this was overdue, and it proves once
Mhm.
again that appeasement doesn't work long term. This regime, the Islamist Republic, was never going to shoot straight with us or be honest about their nuclear aspirations. They just weren't. What I think that for some of us, and myself included, I thought that there'd be, yeah, I'm scared because either the Iraqi people that are there, not Iraqi, I'm sorry, Iranian people that are there can't rise up and take their country back because either a lot of them been killed off, or B, they don't want to. And so I'm now extremely concerned that the minute we put a boot on the ground, we're in for another Iraq or Afghanistan, another one. And I'm not. We didn't want this. Venezuela to me made strategic sense. In the grand scheme of things, it definitely changed things. We have Cuba acting up now in terms of them wanting to throw off uh, their rule, and maybe that would have been regime change. I could have been a lot more in line with. Just because I think if Cuba had capitalism and the ability to have tourism, stuff like that, it'd be a different country. But this is different. And here's one thing I don't understand. I mean, we don't import any oil from Iran at all. We get zero oil from Iran. So why are oil prices going up if we don't get our oil from Iran? And no one's been able to explain that to me, or either that, or I don't understand. But I'm like you, Michael. I'm extremely concerned that we're going to be forced back into a conflict that maybe we shouldn't have been in. We
And
could have
the tough
choked it
part,
out a different way.
the tough part for me, being a vet of the Iraq War, doing 3 tours there, is seeing firsthand what the Iranians did when they came in and fought us in Iraq. Seeing the weapons that they developed, and that they made to counter our weapons and our systems. We would do one thing, they would do another. We would counter, they would counter, and these weapons that they kept filtrating into Iraq to fight with us. They started with these copper shape charges that would be in these small, like, coffee can type things on the side of the road, and they were using the sensors for like a garage door opener, and they would use that, and then they started using heat signatures. So as soon as, like, the engine would pass by the IED on the side of the road, the copper shape charge would blast into the Humvee, or the Striker, or the tank, whatever military vehicle is driving by it. And these shape charges were having such accuracy and deadly force that they were having 1 to 2 soldiers KIA per attack. And that's a very lethal attack when it's happening. And the way that it was just the way that the copper slices through the armor, it was unbelievable. And we add more stuff to protect our vehicles. I won't go into the details on what gets added and how it does. That stuff's still out there, and we don't want people to know. But, like, we add more stuff to defeat their stuff that they put out there. But, like, even the things that were developed, soldiers created things to combat these. They created what was called the Rhino, which was just a big pole in front of the Humvee, and it started with just an ammo can with a little light inside of it, just a little fuse light that would turn on, and that would be the heat signature that would cause the IED to detonate either before the vehicle or after the vehicle. And so then they started moving the shape charges on the side of the road to try to combat the Rhino. And so literally our TTP would be flip a coin to determine whether or not we're going to turn it on that day. And when something comes down to flipping a coin, for survivability or for, how an attack's going to play out. To me, that doesn't seem right. And, that came out, and then they came out with these, these handheld grenades, these RKG3s that were, it looked like the big, potato masher grenade from World War II. And inside of it, it had like a little parachute. So you throw, it would detonate, the shape charge would come out, and a parachute would come out to let it slowly glide into, the attack. And what they did is they removed the parachute, so it would just throw the grenade, the shape charge would just go through and blast. And they were able to, attack without, being hit back. And again, when they do these attacks and we're not able to, get the people that are perpetrating, they're able to continue to attack and attack. And again, these items, the copper shape charges, the RKG3s, these were all Iranian, things that were coming in and attacking us. And I know that when it came to like do you remember the lawsuit against 3M for the hearing protection? So when I was involved with that, they wanted me to join a lawsuit against the country of Iran for IEDs and things that were, on the side of the road that were blowing up. And, I chose not to be a part of that. And they dropped me from the 3M the lawsuit at the same time. And to me, I don't understand, again, we're not lawyers here, but it's just crazy to see how, things like that happen. And, again, you say all these things over the years have added up with Iran and, us in the region and what's going on. And I don't see a path towards victory without, the backing of, a lot of those countries in the region. If we don't have the backing of Iraq, we don't have the backing of Kuwait, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, we have, bases in all these places. And as soon as we got, hit back after the first attacks on Iran in late February, once those bases got hit back with missiles, it's like, all of a sudden those host nations didn't want anything to do with us.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's just the I don't know, methodology, process as old as time. You haven't conquered anything until you step foot on it. And do we have the stomach to do what needs to be done to really take this over? I just have a feeling someone grossly underestimated Iran's resolve and then what they had available to them to stay in this. I mean, on one thing I'm reading that pretty much their entire, Air Force, Navy, and other things are pretty much gone, but obviously not gone enough if they're able to, do what they're doing right now. So I don't know what the right answer is now that this is out of the thing. I don't think when President Obama gave them, all that money and President Biden gave them all that money, we're paying for it. We're paying for it now.
And the other thing I don't understand is why are we taking we're taking away the impediments on Iranian oil at the same time that we're going against them. So now we don't have restrictions on the oil trade from them. And, we don't have the, what is it? It begins with an S. I can't think of the word right now. But, it's just, we put these things in place so that way, the sanctions on Iranian oil. And, we put it on there, and now we're removing sanctions. So when you remove the sanctions on the Iranian oil, now we're allowing them to make more money. And that money then in turn turns into weapons that can hurt us. So it's just, it's difficult to see that playing out at the same time too. Like, I don't understand the method behind that madness. Hey, good evening, Darth Vader. And so it's just, it's a struggle for me to comprehend that what's going on there. And again, being a veteran of Iraq, I don't want to see us engage in another, 10, 20-year conflict that, we put, soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors and like in harm's way in the end for it to, wind up being the same old status quo in that region.
I think part of it is you have a communication from the White House as to what's actually going on and what the plan actually is. That hasn't been articulated very well. I certainly remember, Iran and the Marines in Beirut and Lebanon, other things Iran has done over the last 50 years when the Ayatollahs took over. I certainly can appreciate and certainly loved seeing the Iranians here in Boston praise, the fact that they might be able to go back to their country again. Great. None of that's bad. But I think, again, this was not planned out very well. It's kind of like, and it could be very well become our Ukraine, whereas, Putin has Ukraine, President Trump will have Iran, and look how that's turned out.
And you see the actors that also support Iran too, and you've got Russia and China are both right there to back the Iranian plans and what's going on, and we definitely grossly underestimated their drone capabilities and their technology that they have to do things. I was watching the fact that they were able to to hit a F-35, that in itself able to detect that is a huge plus for them and a minus for us.
Well, it's been talked about before, and I get poo-pooed. I'm like, hey, we're getting to the point where we're kind of like the Japanese and the Germans of World War II. We have expensive, tech-heavy weapon systems that require tons of training, time, effort, and money to field, much less maintain. And we're going to get beaten by somebody who has a simple, easy-to-use mousetrap that just does the job, easy to fix right there with common tools. And, it doesn't require a college degree or a master's to learn how to use it. And, the drone aspect is something to my point, I do not think our government really understood Iran's capability when it came to drones. And the thing is, to your point, we've been able to watch Ukraine, like we've seen how drone warfare changes the entire scope of a battle space.
Yeah.
You didn't think that would happen twice in this desert? They can just, fly with impunity. I mean,
I definitely don't think we took lessons learned from Ukraine and Russia and applied them to what's going on now. I definitely think we overlooked that the same backing, that's happening there. We didn't think, the same effect would be on both fronts.
and
I think
I have a
different country, different fight.
I have a real problem, Mike. There's rumblings, and now you can't ignore it. Like the VA has cut a lot of staff. The VA is looking for ways to cut what they're doing right now for veterans, not expand it. I mean, I know Secretary Collins gets up there and says otherwise, but the numbers are not matching the narrative. And it's kind of like
the other big thing too is is this fight right here. The Major Richard Starr Act again got blocked by one senator. Went out there and stopped the logistical way of implementing this, and you've got 54,000 veterans like myself included. I'll tell you right now that I am one of those 54,000 that was medically retired before I reached my my 20 years in. So you either get your retirement or your VA comp and pen. You can't get both right now, and it shouldn't be that way. If you're if you're medically retired before the 20 because of what happened to you, due to, combat action, like I get a stipend of my retirement. I get what's called the combat related special compensation. And out of my retirement, I get 30%. So I get an extra, I think it's $800 a month, I think is what I get. As an E7, with 14 years in service, my retirement is a lot more than, $800. And for me, I only get that 30% of it because of the combat related special compensation. And if they were to pass the Major Richard Starr Act, people like me and the 54,000 other veterans that are in this position that were retired early due to medical retirement, due to combat related injuries and illness, would be able to collect both their retirement from the military and their their VA compensation. Yeah, Darth Vader. We do. We get less because we were medically retired before we reached our 20 years in service. They basically, your VA and your military retirement, since you can't collect both, whatever your VA is, they take that away from your retirement pay. And if it's more than your retirement pay, you don't get any of your retirement pay at all. So that's what the Major Richard Starr Act is trying to pass. And guys like the founding soldier that's behind it is somebody that may not live to actually see themselves get to that point, get to see this act pass, because the illnesses that are out there, and these veterans that are sick with these cancers that happen so early in life. I've watched guys that I served with go from being healthy soldiers, bright and spirited, to all of a sudden they get something from these environmental exposures in these bases that we go to, and from the burn pits, and from the the sandstorms, the oil fires, and everything else that's we deal with in these countries. Even what we deal with in our own country, like the Camp Lejeune Water Act. Everything that was contaminating the water that the folks at Lejeune were ingesting, brushing their teeth with, taking showers with, that got into their systems, and all those cancers and everything that cause those men and women to get these rare diseases that you won't only see till people hit their 70s and 80s, and guys are getting them in their 40s and 50s. And I've buried probably 5 to 6 soldiers of rare cancers before they hit the age 50 because of their environmental hazards that they had at different bases. The unit I was part of out of North Reading, the 972 Military Police Company, when they went to Uzbekistan, they're at a base called K2. And that base K2 has been deemed the most environmentally deadly base that the U.S. has ever occupied. And one of the soldiers we were with in Iraq, a few years later, all of a sudden started complaining of headaches while we were in Iraq. And, he went home, he found out he had, all this stuff going on in his brain, and these tumors and this cancer that had grown. And it was from that base that he was at in Uzbekistan. And then the environmental hazards, they took soil samples and just saw, what was going on over there. And, like I said, our soldiers dealt with the water there, the JP8 that you use in the Humvees to fuel the trucks, just inhaling that while you're, refueling your truck, and, the stuff that spills on you, the stuff that you get on you, people don't realize, how much, affects a soldier, even, operating inside of a Humvee. The reason you have the hearing protection in, and you have to have hearing, is that constant noise of the Humvee engine and the sound inside that will, make you have the hearing loss, and that will give you tinnitus. And like, that's why it was so important that 3M made the hearing protection for us. And then when it failed us, so many vets wound up with these things. And again, like you said, with what's going on in the VA right now, they're removing tinnitus as a disability. You can't just claim tinnitus. Tinnitus has to be a secondary now to something else. So it's like they're making it more difficult for veterans to claim things. And yet they're saying, oh, we're doing this, we're building more VAs, we're making things better, we're getting rid of interior decorators, but at the same time they're firing physical therapy doctors, they're firing nurses, they're firing they're not allowing people to fill the positions that need to be filled when they're having hiring freezes. So it's really tough to see what's happening at the VA at the same time that we're getting into another conflict. And we're going to create more veterans, and people keep questioning out loud, why do we have more veterans with claims? And it's like, we just had a 20-year war. That's why we have more veterans with claims, because these guys went out there and they did these things, and they fought back and said, hey, I'm fine, I'll go out there and I'll keep fighting. Guys like me, I injured my back on the first tour. I had a herniated disc, L5 S1, pinching both my S1 nerves down both legs. I still went back for 3 more tours before I finally collapsed while I was doing an Army 10-mile road race. And even then, I had an Ohio State University athletic director. He was a full-bird colonel. He was giving me steroid injections in my spine so I could stay on the tour for another 4 months. So it's like, the Army uses and abuses you, and then when you're done, they spit you out, and you're supposed to have the promise of the VA being there to honor, repairing you and fixing you and making you whole, whether it's through financial compensation, through physical therapy, through surgery, through repair, and get you to be able to live a normal life somewhat. And a lot of people look at that and say, oh, there's a lot of infighting still with the veteran community saying, only combat vets deserve it, only these guys deserve it, only this, and that fighting then gets spread to people that don't know what they're talking about, and they take these little snippets from people, and they take a microphone and they shout that out, and then that hurts our community.
I'm telling you, I reposted my Oscar Mike Radio Facebook page. It's not a new clip, but it's an older clip of a Navy SEAL veteran saying, he's tired of veteran victims, and veterans should just, hey, if you need this or need that, just go to the store and get it. If you need insoles, just go and get it. I'm like, this guy's has never dealt with orthopedic injuries. Like, you just shouldn't go to Dr. Scholl's or CVS to get orthopedic care. You shouldn't. And this is why, veterans do this stuff, because they hear this stuff, and then 10 years later, when they're almost a cripple, then they get help. And you bring up a good point. Like, we have plenty of money to give people who aren't American citizens all the help they could possibly want. But the same people will nickel and dime veterans every chance they get. And it's not that we're victims. You do mechanic work, electrical work, other work in the military. It should translate a lot easier in the civilian world. And I've said this before, you've heard me say this, if you're taking a bullet for this country, you shouldn't have to pay property taxes. You should be exempt off the bat, not get, well, you're 100% disabled. Massachusetts will give you $1,500 off your property taxes. Wow. No. It's got to mean something. And so I am extremely reluctant to put American troops on foreign soil for situations not our own. I think if we could, help the Iranian people out, absolutely. If we could alleviate the suffering that they've been under, absolutely. I mean, the Ayatollahs went there and killed, tens of thousands of them, 6 months ago, and no one lifted a finger. So I get it on that regard, but we got to restock our, equipment base. We've got to, fix our own house, and we've got to make sure our recruitment levels are okay, and we're getting quality people and build ourselves up again. And instead of just running right back out there, dropping some bombs, which we're very good at that, but that's just a part of what we're doing. And, I am interested in Cuba. Like Secretary Rubio said, I'd love to see regime change in Cuba. I would love to go scuba diving off the coast of Cuba. I think it's a fantastic place for tourism and music and stuff like that. I think it'd do great, but
I know the guys.
I don't want to see a 22-year-old. I don't want to see a 22-year-old, kid, crippled for life, to fatten someone else's wallet because they're a defense contractor. That's the problem I'm having, Mike.
Yep. And that's these big issues too, is, is all this money, $1 trillion went to the Department of Defense this year, this fiscal year, $1 trillion. And they are holding up the Major Richard Starr Act because of $9 billion over 10 years. You think about the difference in the $9 billion over 10 years to help 54,000 wounded veterans versus $1 trillion that may go to programs that may never actually happen. You look at, years ago, the Army tried making this silent helicopter. And, they put in $7 billion into this program to develop this silent helicopter. And then just one day said, cut the program. And nothing came of it. So $7 billion went to this creation of a silent helicopter that never was created. And yet they don't want to put $9 billion over 10 years to help the veterans that have already served and have already given of their lives to this country, just to, procedurally saying that that's too much money. And at the same time are willing to increase, how much money we're giving, right now to go fight, how many millions and billions it's going to cost to continue the war with Iran. You look at that, and it's wild to me that, they're willing to put that in, daily, yet at the same time, they're not willing to add into the fight of us what's going on with those that already come back from war. Again, you make a promise to these guys, you tell them you'll make things right for them, you best damn well do it, because the best recruiters for the military are those that have been through it already. The best thing that the U.S. has always had has been your legacies, your family members that joined because their family members joined. The legacy of service is one thing that you see more often than anything when you look at the makeup of our armed forces. And if you hurt the veterans, they're going to stop going out there and saying, hey, Mike Jr., you should go ahead and enlist, or you should go ahead and go ROTC and become an officer in the armed forces, because things will be better. It's okay to do. Right now I can't honestly tell somebody to go enlist and and tell them that they'll be taken care of when they come back.
Like I said, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard taking it seriously. You wonder what they're asking for at this point. It just, I don't know.
Darth Vader, on this question, 100%, I still would. And it's not for the same reasons why I joined, but it's for the reasons once I joined. I enlisted right after 9/11. I enlisted December 2001. I was a senior in high school. Signed up, had to put father unknown because my dad wouldn't sign off on it. So just my mom signed off on my thing. I enlisted 2 or 3 weeks before I turned 18. And then I shipped out, the summer after I graduated. I was in Germany when Iraq kicked off, got sent back home. Went to, Fort Drum, trained up for a few months, went down to Fort Leonard Wood, did my protective service training so I could work for the general, and then went over to Iraq with the 42nd ID, 2004 to 2005. We were there, did an 18-month tour for that first tour. Second tour I did 07, 08 in Baghdad. Again, I did protective service, static site security, convoy escorts. On the last tour in Iraq, I did the police transition team. It got later changed to a different acronym, but it was still the same mission. We worked with the Iraqi police. Myself as a squad leader, I worked with a district chief of police. And we had 4 towns underneath the district that were the substations, and we worked with the different offices, whether it was intelligence, corrections, the chief, and everybody in between traffic, we, worked with each departments to make sure that they were able to do what they could do, up to the Iraqi standard. And a lot of times, we would give them, 5 new F-350s to be, these police trucks overseas. And, we go back a month later and only one of the trucks is there. They gave 2 to a local sheikh. They gave, one to the former police chief, and they gave one to somebody else. And it's like, we were giving them to you to be patrol vehicles. And then, they would ask for oil, and like we would give them, a fuel truck, and they would have to repay the oil that they had already used from, local people. And like, it just, a lot of it was, was give and take, and a lot of it was barter. And it just, it wasn't going to be, the Boston Police Department in any shape or form. But, we wanted to have them trained and working well out there and being able to take care of their own so we could leave. And, the area that we were in, Anbar province, we took over for the Marine Corps there in 2009. And, they had really, they had what was called the Sawa, the awakening, where they realized, we need to take care of our own country and push out these, these foreign people that are just coming here to fight the Americans. And so the Iraqis stood up and started fighting back on their own. And places like Fallujah and, Ramadi and things like that, that were some of the, deadliest places in Iraq, became some of the safest. And like, it was just wild to see the difference from, when I was there in 2004, 2005, on how, you wouldn't let anybody on the road next to you, to being there in 2009, 2010, vehicles are coming in and out of your convoys. And it just, it was such a different war. And again, it was the foreign fighters that were coming in there. But back to the question for W.A.R, it was the men and women I served with that made it worth it. It was the soldiers that I had, and the soldiers that I trained, and the soldiers that still have that relationship with me today, that, I can call and I can lean on at any moment, that, are willing to drop everything and come out and see me, or, we'll take a call from me at 2 a.m. We'll call me at, whatever time and say, hey, Sergeant Gear, I got this issue, can you help me? It's those people that I served with that make it worth it. It's, it's the men and women that are in the service that made serving worth it, not so much the end state of the wars, but the working with the men and women in it. Howdy. What do you think about that, Travis? Do you think you would still go back knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I mean, my Marine Corps experience was different than a lot of people's, because I wasn't even out of MOS school. We were told that my MOS was going away, and none of us believed that the Marine Corps would actually put you in an MOS that was going away. And oops, found out that they actually did. And then when you see it happen to tankers and then snipers, it happens. I agree with you. And anybody out there, it's truly the esprit de corps, the brother and sisterhood you have. Like, I'm going to do a conference and doing some volunteering, and 2 Marines I serve with, are driving hundreds of miles to volunteer with me, just because, you know what, they want to be, we want to be together, and it's a good way to do it. And it's those kinds of things that you really miss and admire about the people you serve with. And the other thing for me is, I'll tell anybody, one of the things the Marine Corps gave me was this mindset that, okay, we're in the suck. It's bad. This is not fun. This is real and fun, but not real fun. But I can get through it. I didn't serve a long time, but I served long enough where that mindset stuck, and that mindset has gotten me through more challenges in life than anything else, where other people would quit or give up. I'm just, I'm like, I've gotten through worse, and I can get through anything. And so, yeah, I would do it. There are some days, I'm sure you agree with me, Mike, where you really miss it. We're all peeing the gear. We're all having to, snap in the rifle range. We're all together. And nothing against my colleagues professionally, but it gets to the weekend, we don't want to see each other, and that's just normal. And it can be a hard adjustment once you've been in that environment.
And, the biggest thing is, like you said, you embrace that suck together, and going through those hard times and those things together that you went into, it, it was tough to see, but those hard times is what, made that bond stronger, going through those things, day 12 for us, hitting a landmine, before we'd even finished, crossing over with first ID, to take over the area. And, a landmine strike happened against us. And like, we knew, holy shit, we were in the war. And, and then, each time I went back subsequently, it was, going back to be with the guys I went with before and to be there to give back. The first tour I went on, I had guys that had been to Bosnia. I was with guys that had been to, Afghanistan, that had, combat experience, that were able to, teach me and, give me that guidance that I needed to make it through that first tour. And then I took that experience that I took from Iraq from, 04, 05 and gave back to the guys in, 7, 8 and 9, 10. And, when I went back in 12, tried to go to Afghanistan and went up to Kuwait, we still took what we learned and were able to implement it and, that share that wisdom that we had.
Well, it's an amazing thing.
I went back in 09 with the foreign fighters beside ISIS. Yes. So you had, ISIS didn't come until after we left. You had what started as AQI, Al Qaeda Iraq, and then they changed to the Mahdi army. So they would fall underneath Mahdi, who was in north of Baghdad. He had that little section there that he ran, and he ran a lot of forces there. You had a lot of Iranian forces coming in. You had guys from Syria coming in to fight us. There was a lot of foreign fighters, like I said, coming in that would, come to Iraq. They would learn the lessons there, and then they would also go back to Afghanistan and take the lessons learned against us in Iraq and apply them to the fight in Afghanistan, where they had a better trained, advantage over us. And, we saw a lot of things happen in Iraq, and then they would transition over to the battlefield in Afghanistan too. And it was wild to see, that's what they were doing. They were, sending fighters here to learn how to fight us and then bring it over there. And it just, same thing, these guys are still, of fighting age, you still have these, guys that were, 15, 16 years old when they fought us in Iraq. And now they, they're only 36 years old now. They still have, plenty of fight left in them, and they're going to be there in Iran to hit us again if we go boots on ground.
Well, I got my show coming up here.
Absolutely. Who do you got tonight, Travis?
So I have James and Mara Van Puren from Military Creator Con 2026. They're the founders of Military Creator Con, and they're coming on to talk with me about, the origin, what they're trying to do. It's a little bit different type of conference for different types of veterans in the creative space. And, I'm looking forward to sharing their story with everyone.
Absolutely. Of course, Travis, your number one fan wants to say hello.
Well, there you are. How are you doing?
Good.
Travis is going to have
she's getting big, man. I remember when she was just crawling around, and now, oh my God.
Yep. Tell everybody how old you are.
Still 4.
She's still 4. Yep.
There you go.
So can you say thank you guys for joining us tonight?
Thank you guys joining with us tonight.
All right. We are WAR.
Much.
We are
Good to see you.
and this, reasons like this is why we keep doing it. So thank you guys for joining. And we're gonna, check out Travis, Oscar Mike Radio, all your platforms for checking out podcasts, or just check them out here on YouTube in about 10 minutes. Thank you guys for joining us. We are WAR. We are resilient.
Thank you.